Jimmy Kimmel loses his late night TV show over an objectionable remark about Charlie Kirk's assassin, but also after a regulatory threat from the head of the Federal Communications Commission. Is this a loss for free speech? Is it a First Amendment problem? And what even is the role of the FCC in the age of YouTube?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the editorial page, columnists Kim Strassel and Alicia Finley. The chain of events leading to the indefinite suspension of Jimmy Kimmel's late-night TV career is pretty clear to follow. On Monday, he made some remarks that I think could be fairly called factually incorrect at the very least. Listen to this.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points.
Then on Tuesday, the head of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, responded to those remarks. Here he is on the Benny Johnson podcast.
I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel. Or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC. Again, there's actions that we can take on licensed broadcasters. And frankly, I think that it's really sort of past time that a lot of these licensed broadcasters themselves push back on Comcast and Disney and say, listen, we are going to preempt. We are not going to run Kimmel anymore until you straighten this out, because we licensed broadcaster, are running the possibility of fines or license revocation from the FCC if we continue to run content that ends up being a pattern of news distortion.
Shortly after that, Nexstar Media, which owns TV stations that are part of the ABC network, said that it would preempt the Jimmy Kimmel show. Then Disney said it would suspend Kimmel's show indefinitely. Kim, your column on Friday in the Journal is on this under the headline, Back to Censor Culture. What is the argument you're making?
So I think it's really important that we make a distinction here between Jimmy Kimmel's comments and whether or not it was a good idea for Disney to suspend his show, whether or not there are indeed consequences for saying stupid or factually incorrect information on TV. Businesses can and do care about their reputation. They care about viewer backlash. And they have every ability to fire employees who they think are engaging in that. And also, by the way, it's legitimate for Americans to have been outraged about that, to register their protest. That is, you can call that what you will. But that is very different from what happened with the Brendan Carr comments. Once he went on that podcast and suggested that the FCC might take action against these local affiliates if they continue to run. And he was very clear about that, Kyle. He went on in the course of that conversation to talk about the fact that the FCC has a mandate to enforce the public interest in network broadcasting, and to argue that, therefore, what was happening on Kimmel's show, he defined it as a pattern of news distortion. Also said that what ABC was doing was essentially a political and partisan circus, that ran afoul of the public interest, and therefore the FCC might be entitled to levy fines or pull licenses, etc. Once that happened, you now have the specter of government threatening to engage in action if a certain type of speech is not shut down. That falls under the definition of censorship. It's very problematic. And I think what's a little disappointing to me is Brendan Carr has long been a free speech advocate, a very strong voice for that. And even 5 years ago, there's a statement from him online saying, does the FCC have this roving mandate to use the public interest to have the government get rid of speech that we do not like? No, it doesn't. I agreed with him then. And I don't see really any way you can look at this and not feel it is. The government not agreeing with statements that Jimmy Kimmel made and putting forward the suggestion that there will be actions taken against affiliates if they did not stop him from speaking. And of course, that is what they did. I think the sequence here is really important. If ABC or Nexstar had made these decisions prior to that podcast coming out, that might be something different. And again, it might suggest they were doing things on their own. But the sequence here certainly suggests that they may well have been responding to essentially what was a threat from a government regulator.
A couple of things I would add here. One is that this is obviously a news event, and it's developing in real time, and there are these commentators making statements on it in real time, and some of those may be wrong. I think what Jimmy Kimmel said there was factually incorrect. He said that in his monologue on Monday. It became much more clear that it was factually incorrect on Tuesday when prosecutors unveiled this charge sheet against Tyler Robinson with statements, text messages he had made saying that he shot Charlie Kirk because he was tired of his hate, for example, that he lived with a romantic partner who is transgender. And so part of the difficulty here is commentators making statements in real time, though I think it's also fair to say that if Kimmel had been paying attention and not in an ideological silo, it probably would have been clear to him even on Monday that what he was saying was not likely to be backed up by the evidence. I understand why people out there in Middle America might be tired of Kimmel's show, even beyond this one statement. And so there's some discussion, some chatter on the right, Alicia, about whether, maybe Disney saw that. It saw that this was not a show that was going to be continue to be attractive to a broad swath of the country. As TV viewership overall declines, these kinds of legacy shows get more expensive, harder to make a profit on. And so maybe Disney was using this as an excuse. And there's some plausible deniability there, some effort to suggest that this is the market working. But I would agree with Kim that the chain of events here makes that hard to sustain. And, maybe if that were the case, then what Brendan Carr has done here is given the left an argument that, maybe if Disney was thinking that way, it would have happened anyway. And Brendan Carr has now trundled in here and made this about government regulation and made this about censorship. And by the way, I would say that some of that chatter on the right ignores the real regulatory threat to these media stations. Notable that Nexstar has a $6 billion merger that it wants to do with another owner of local TV stations that is about shortly to go before the Federal Communication Commission.
Right. So actually in years past, these mergers of local stations has been actually very contentious. And if you go back to the first Trump administration, Sinclair tried to, which is a local broadcaster, tried to merge with the Tribune Company. And this was very controversial, at least with the left, because Sinclair's coverage generally tends to lean conservative. And so you had a lot of progressives lobbying the FCC to stop that acquisition or deal, purely because of speech grounds that they didn't want the conservative media to expand. Now that deal ended up falling through for other reasons, but conservatives were very critical of the left back then, as Kim pointed out to some remarks from Brendan Carr, who served on the FCC even during the first Trump administration, and said, look, here, we're regulators, but the government shouldn't be playing a role in determining what kinds of content broadcasters or in for that matter, cable networks decide to air. The left actually wanted, if you can go back and find some quotes, there were Democrats who actually thought that, well, no, the FCC should actually have an expanded role over cable networks because they wanted to censor Fox News and some conservative content that they didn't like. So the conservatives traditionally have been on the side of free speech. They criticized the Biden administration for using government power threats similar to what Brendan Carr has done to suppress COVID contrarians on social media platforms. That actually drew a lawsuit, or actually several lawsuits, in the Supreme Court. Ultimately held that there wasn't enough circumstantial evidence that certain people or certain users were censored in response to the Biden administration's threats to use antitrust law and Section 230 to crack down on social media platforms. Now, fast forward here, I think the chronology is pretty apparent that the Nexstar and Sinclair took their cues from the FCC, from Brendan Carr. They didn't want to lose their licenses. I'd also point out that Sinclair probably might have taken this decision anyways. And that's what makes it all the more unfortunate, is that now it appears that government is coming in and coercing these stations. Who knows, we may get a lawsuit. Jimmy Kimmel could claim that there was government coercion. There are some Supreme Court precedents on this. And he gets to pose as a First Amendment martyr rather than, a jerk that I think he came off as.
Kim, your column gets into some of these examples of why conservatives have a little sympathy for Jimmy Kimmel. Roseanne Barr being fired, canceled for an objectionable remark that she says was a joke on social media. Megyn Kelly parting ways with a big broadcaster over remarks about the appropriateness of blackface, Halloween costumes, and so forth. But Kim, a couple distinctions. One is those were, I think, private actors generally responding to criticisms and boycott threats and whatnot without any interference. And I grant that, again, that is part of the ideological silo of some of these media companies at work. But the injection of the government's power here, I do think, makes that different. And then also, the question is this just one more step down the spiral of this kind of cancel culture? Now, the right doing what the left did, because the right is not going to be in power forever. And if this is the new standard, boy, watch out.
This is why I began this by talking about the need to make a distinction, because I think we've become a bit sloppy in the terminology we use. And all these people are referring to what happened to Jimmy Kimmel as cancel culture. I think I would put that category of what happens to people in a distinct pot. It's usually because, and what we saw with Roseanne Barr and Megyn Kelly, and some of these other firings that we had, was that you had elites in the country, the media, the progressive left, members of Congress coming out, criticizing things that had been said online. It was sort of outside of the realm of the regulators, and it causing an uproar that essentially made some corporations without a lot of backbone decide that they were going to cut loose some of these folks, rather than stand up for free speech. You also saw attempts to do that. In the end, they failed. For instance, to get Spotify to get rid of Joe Rogan, to have Netflix, get part ways with Dave Chappelle, the comedian. And, those didn't work out, but they were kind of ugly events. By the way, we're now seeing the reverse of that in the wake of Charlie Kirk. We've had a lot of stories out there about average folks posting things online and their employers deciding that they need to let them go. Again, we can have a conversation. Businesses have the right to do this, including those that canceled those on the right. Is it a good look? What are the lines between what's allowable free speech and not? And what are the mechanisms that cause that to happen? I think there's some real problems with cancel culture. And now, you have the right trying to use a new word for it. This is actually consequence culture. Suppose like now, if you're getting canceled, it's because you're having to own up and take responsibility for things that you said. I don't know exactly how you can justify that in light of what happened to Megyn Kelly and Roseanne Barr. But anyway, that's that discussion. It's very different from censorship. And censorship, again, everybody forgets this. The First Amendment puts restrictions on the government's right to take action on speech. It essentially is a limiting principle there. And that's why censorship, when we think of censorship, it's censorship that comes from government. And I think it's important that we make this distinction as we go forward, because the right was correctly furious about Biden censorship, in particular of social media. As Alicia noted, there were Biden officials, including on the FCC, who tried to use versions of censorship to help forward their agenda. And the right has always been firmly opposed to that. To now come out and say, well, it's okay because we're really mad about what happened to all our people. You're opening the door to have even more of that across more agencies. And at some point, as Alicia noted, Democrats will be back in charge again. They have an ambition to expand powers, like, for instance, over cable television. And I really think we don't want to go down this road.
Alicia, do you think there is a real First Amendment free speech case here? I mean, a couple of the precedents, there was one from last year, a case called NRA v. Vullo. Here is the statement from a unanimous Supreme Court. The NRA plausibly alleged that respondent violated the First Amendment by coercing regulated entities to terminate their business relationships with the NRA in order to punish or suppress gun promotion advocacy. And what's important, I think, in that line is coercion. That is the test with respect to government pressure on private parties. So this Supreme Court ruling allowed this NRA lawsuit to go forward. As I recall, it involved a regulator who was suggesting to some bank entities, financial insurers, and so forth, that they would have some risks, reputational risks, perhaps, if they did business with the NRA. On the point about the pressure by the Biden administration on the social media companies, that the Supreme Court did not allow to go forward in at least one instance, saying that there was problems tracing specific complaints and specific speech on platforms like Facebook that was taken down to the actions of any government official. So I imagine if maybe Jimmy Kimmel sues here, part of the question will be whether there is any plausible deniability in the FCC commissioner's statement here. I mean, maybe Kimmel could say, I need some discovery. We need to find out what Nexstar was actually thinking and what they were actually acting on when they decided that they were going to preempt my show.
Well, I think that's right, and maybe Disney as well. You mentioned the Vullo precedent, and that, as you point out, it involved some financial institutions in New York, and there was a real campaign, and this was actually many years ago, or done under Andrew Cuomo, to use the government's leverage over financial institutions in New York, Wall Street companies, and threaten them, saying, as you point out, that the doing business with the NRA and some other gun rights groups, providing insurance contracts to them, that could create a quote unquote reputational risk. Similarly, actually, you saw under the Obama administration what came to be known as Operation Choke Point. And that was very similar in that you had companies, or rather you had regulators, FDIC, Justice Department, go around to banks and argue or tell them, hey there, we see that you're doing business with some gun retailers or pawn shops or payday dealers. We think that this could pose a reputational risk. And when that's basically code for you're going to get marked down on your ratings. You won't be able to expand your business or your bank. And there are all kinds of repercussions if you basically do business or are deemed to have reputational risks. And that caused a lot of banks to pull back and cut off contracts and cut off banking accounts for these certain industries. Now, there wasn't a legal challenge there. There might have been, if some of the companies that lost access to accounts or such sued and claimed that it was because of their advocacy. But in New York, you actually did have the NRA sue, and you got this precedent that was pretty clear, saying that the government cannot essentially use its leverage over private institutions to try to chill speech. Now, the reason why it was unanimous was because it was pretty clear based on the evidence, not just from discovery, but actually public statements and letters that the government, New York government, was making at the time, that they were intentionally trying to essentially drive the NRA into bankruptcy. But here again, I think the Carr statements are, smoking gun. Very much like Kim said, it's say, hey, hey, nice business, hey, nice licenses you have there, and, shame if something were to happen to them. So the question is Jimmy Kimmel going to sue? I don't know, but I don't think that this is a litigation that the Trump administration really wants to court at this point.
The bigger question, Kim, and the question maybe for Congress is, what is the FCC's role in an age
Who
of
knows?
declining broadcast TV coverage? So I looked up some numbers. These are from Nielsen. Streaming notches a record 44.8% of total TV usage in May, compared with 24.1% of cable, 20.1% of broadcast. So that means only about a fifth of the content that people are streaming on their TVs comes through the airwaves that the FCC has regulatory authority over. And as that continues to decline, by the way, this is often transparent to people who are at home pushing buttons on their TV. They push one button and that show is regulated by the FCC. They push another button and that show is not regulated by the FCC in a way that I think is invisible to people sitting on their couches. One other thought I'd throw in is if you thought that Jimmy Kimmel's statement about the Kirk assassination was offensive, boy, I hope you have not been on Twitter or YouTube in the past week or so, because it pales in comparison to a lot of the stuff that is going around on these platforms that people are using day to day on their phones. And so, Kim, it does raise the question, what is the point of the FCC? I mean, I understand it to the extent that we still have important uses of radio spectrum. And if I have a TV station and I'm broadcasting on this set of spectrum, I don't want interference from you. I don't want my CB radio to be mixing in with the cockpit air traffic control radios. So there's still a role for government, I think, to allocate and keep separate those bands of public resource, to put it that way. But in terms of regulating television content, I mean, what are we doing here in 2025?
Yeah, this is just a classic example of how no one in Washington ever stops and reviews the purpose of agencies that have been on the books forever and ever, and whether or not they have not well outlived their original purpose. I mean, let's remember the FCC was essentially created to look after radio. This was then expanded to the broadcast stations. So we're hearkening back to a time when everybody watched TV with little rabbit ears to get their reception to come in right. And the highlight of your evening was Gilligan's Island, The Love Boat, and, one of the three major news broadcasters. And that was all the news you could get, folks. I mean, and that was it. And so the government felt it had some compelling public interest in saying what could be on these limited ranges and waves that were out there reaching the public. This was also just a much more gentle time in America, right? Where I think that the average American for a long time probably would have thought that there might be some merit to making sure that, given that the only thing that could come on through their television were these three stations, making sure that their children weren't subjected to some sort of obscene or obnoxious programming, right? We are long past those days. As you note, I mean, turn on Netflix, go look at your Instagram feed, anything that's coming through. Parents do still have an obligation, but it's become much harder. And you have to ask why we have two completely different standards, especially because to the extent that most people still sign up for their local ABC or NBC or CBS affiliate. They might get other content, but they're doing it because they want to actually watch the weather, right? They want to see the local news. That's why people are still even doing it. And so I think that there's time. We need now to step back, look at this. And while you say there might be an important role to be played in the management and the disbursement of frequencies and broadcasts, there's a bigger question about what government interest there is in moderating or policing every element of the content that come through those waves, given the completely different standard that is now set forth on everyone else.
Thank you, Kim and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.